I've been getting a steady wave of comments from this community every single week, and they are all asking the same question in different ways. Where is the $200 per month raise? Why have I not received it yet? Did they forget about me? I thought this was supposed to start at the beginning of 2026. What is going on? These are completely fair questions, and honestly, they deserve a real answer, not a vague deflection. So today, I want to address this directly, and I also want to share something that I personally wrote and sent to Congress because I believe lawmakers are making a massive mistake right now, one that they are going to pay for later this year when the midterm elections come around. I am going to read that letter to you in full because I think it captures exactly what needs to be said, and I want you to hear it and tell me whether you agree. But first, let me give you the background so everyone is on the same page, because I know some of you in this community have been following this closely for a long time, and some of you are just now hearing about it. Back in 2025, lawmakers introduced a piece of legislation called the Emergency Social Security Inflation Relief Act. They did not introduce it once. They introduced it multiple times, at least twice that we know of publicly, once in March and again in October of last year. The proposal called for a temporary $200 per month increase to Social Security benefits for a period of 6 months. The intention was for this raise to go into effect at the start of 2026, meaning January, February, March, through June of this year. Every eligible beneficiary was supposed to be seeing an extra $200 in their monthly payment right now. And yet here we are, a couple of months into 2026, and not a single one of you has seen that money, not one. The raise was proposed. It was talked about. Lawmakers stood in front of cameras and discussed it publicly, and then it went essentially nowhere. That is the situation, and I think it deserves to be called out plainly and directly. So I sat down and I wrote a letter to Congress. I am going to read it to you now, and I want you to listen to this carefully because every word in it is intentional, and I mean every word of it. To the Honorable United States Congress, this message is coming to you from a group of over 534,000 seniors, people with disabilities, and Social Security beneficiaries of various types. We are sending this message before you self-destruct due to lack of follow-through with your messaging during this year of affordability. It is no surprise to anyone that Social Security beneficiaries are falling behind at the fastest pace we have seen in recent times. Of course, this does not include all beneficiaries, but rather the lowest income beneficiaries who continue to get squeezed the most. In 2025, a group of lawmakers introduced multiple times the Emergency Social Security Inflation Relief Act. This would provide a temporary $200 increase to benefit checks for a 6-month period. As previously mentioned, not all Social Security beneficiaries are struggling, but rather just the lowest income individuals. Simply put, here is what we encourage you to do before it is too late. Increase the $200 monthly increase timeline from 6 months to a minimum of 12 months and only include those beneficiaries who receive a monthly payment under $2,000 per month with a phase-out between $2,000 and $2,500 of monthly benefits. This would allow those dollars to go to the most vulnerable and needy individuals by limiting payments to beneficiaries with a monthly benefit over $2,500. This would allow the $200 to be extended for a minimum of 12 months. We also suggest this be paid out of general funds versus pulling these dollars out of the Social Security Trust Fund. These simple adjustments would allow the most vulnerable beneficiaries to get the much-needed financial relief they need for an extended period of time without jeopardizing the Social Security Trust Fund in the process. We encourage you to take action now before you lose face, lose trust, and lose your job during the midterm elections. Time is ticking. Now let me break down what that letter is really saying and why I believe every single word of it matters, because there are a few things packed into that document that I want to expand on. And I think once you hear the full picture, you are going to be nodding your head along with me. Let's start with the most basic reality. Not every Social Security beneficiary is struggling equally right now. I want to be clear and honest about that because I think sometimes in these conversations, we talk about beneficiaries as if they are all in the same financial situation, and they are simply not. Someone receiving $3,500 a month in Social Security retirement benefits is in a fundamentally different position than someone receiving $800 or $900 a month. Both are beneficiaries, both paid into the system. But the financial pressure they are experiencing in 2026 is not remotely equivalent. The person receiving $3,500 a month has breathing room. They can absorb inflation. They can handle a spike in grocery prices or a higher utility bill without it becoming a genuine crisis. The person receiving $800 a month cannot. For them, every price increase is a direct threat to their ability to cover the basics. So when we are designing relief, when we are talking about where the money should go and who should receive it, it makes absolutely no sense to treat those two situations the same way. That is exactly why the letter calls for implementing the $200 raise with a phase-out structure. The proposal is straightforward. Beneficiaries receiving under $2,000 per month get the full $200 raise. Between $2,000 and $2,500 per month, the benefit phases out gradually. Above $2,500 per month, you do not receive the additional payment. This is not punishing higher-earning beneficiaries. It is simply directing the relief money to the people who need it most. And here is the beautiful thing about structuring it this way. By narrowing the pool of recipients to those truly in need, the same pool of money stretches significantly further. Instead of spreading $200 across every single Social Security recipient, regardless of their financial situation, you concentrate that relief among the people living closest to the edge. And that concentration allows you to extend the duration of the payment from 6 months to a minimum of 12 months. 6 months of $200 is $2,200. That helps in $200. But 6 months is also long enough for people to start budgeting around that extra money, to make decisions based on having it, to feel slightly more financially stable. And then, when it ends, the rug gets pulled out from under them, and they are worse off psychologically than they were before it started. 12 months is meaningfully different. It gives people a full year of planning horizon. It allows them to make real adjustments to their financial situation rather than just treading water for half a year. Now, let me address the funding question, because this is consistently the objection that lawmakers reach for when this proposal comes up. And I want to knock it down completely because it is simply not as complicated as they are making it sound. The concern is that paying the $200 raise out of the Social Security Trust Fund will accelerate the depletion of that fund, bringing forward the date when benefits might need to be reduced due to insolvency. And look, that is a legitimate concern in the abstract. The trust fund does face long-term funding challenges, and drawing extra money out of it does not help that situation. But here is the thing. Nobody is suggesting we have to pay this out of the trust fund. The letter explicitly calls for funding this raise out of general federal funds. And if that framing does not immediately resolve the objection for you, let me offer another one that I think is even harder to argue with. The President of the United States has been publicly and proudly talking for months about the hundreds of billions of dollars in tariff revenue that the federal government has collected. In 2025 alone, that number was $264 billion. In January of 2026, another $30 billion plus came in. He has been presenting these numbers as a major achievement, evidence that his economic policies are generating enormous revenue for the country. All right, if that is the case, if there is genuinely that much money flowing into the federal government through tariff duties, then let us see some of it reach the people who need it most. 30 million people receiving $200 a month for 12 months is a significant but manageable commitment relative to the revenue numbers being cited. This is not an impossible ask. It is a question of whether the political will exists to direct that money toward the Americans who are struggling most, rather than letting it sit in general revenue. And this brings me to the political reality that I keep coming back to, because I think it is the most important piece of context for understanding why this has not happened yet and why it needs to happen soon. We are in a midterm election year. Every member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election in November. A significant portion of the Senate is on the ballot as well. The Social Security beneficiary population is not a small or politically insignificant group. We are talking about tens of millions of Americans, many of whom vote at extraordinarily high rates. Seniors vote, people with disabilities vote, fixed income retirees vote. This is one of the most reliable and engaged voting populations in the entire country. And right now, that population is watching lawmakers sit on their hands while the affordability crisis that those same lawmakers have been publicly acknowledging continues to grind away at their monthly budgets. That is a dangerous combination for incumbents heading into November. The letter says it plainly: take action now before you lose face, lose trust, and lose your job during the midterm elections. That is not a threat. That is a description of how democratic accountability works. You tell people you are going to do something to help them. You do not do it. They remember in November. That is the basic equation, and it has ended careers of people who underestimated it. What I find genuinely frustrating about this situation, and I think you probably feel the same way, is how straightforward the solution actually is. The Emergency Social Security Inflation Relief Act has been introduced. The mechanism exists. The need is documented and undeniable. The funding sources are available without touching the trust fund. The political argument for doing it is stronger than the argument for doing nothing. And yet here we are, months into 2026, and the people who need this money the most are still waiting, still checking their bank accounts, still wondering if they were forgotten, still reaching out to this community to ask whether anything has changed. The answer right now is that nothing has changed, and that is exactly the problem. Let me also address something that I hear occasionally, which is the counter-argument that a temporary payment is not a real solution and might even create problems by getting people dependent on money that is going to disappear. And honestly, I have some sympathy for that argument when we are talking about the original 6-month proposal. 6 months is genuinely not long enough to build any meaningful financial stability. You get the money, you start to rely on it a little bit, you make small adjustments to your spending, and then it ends. The psychological impact of that removal can actually be harder than if the money never came at all, because now you have experienced what a little more financial breathing room feels like and then had it taken away. That is a real concern, which is exactly why the letter argues for extending the timeline to a minimum of 12 months and focusing the payment on those who truly need it. A full year of additional income, even $200 a month, gives people time to actually use that money strategically, pay down a small debt, build a tiny emergency cushion, stop choosing between medications and groceries. These are not luxury outcomes. These are the basic dignities that the lowest income beneficiaries in this country are struggling to maintain every single month. And every dollar of that $200 that goes to a low-income Social Security beneficiary gets spent almost immediately. It goes to the grocery store, the pharmacy, the utility company, the landlord. It flows directly back into local economies within days of arriving. This is not money that sits in an investment account or gets shuffled around in financial markets. It is money that hits the real economy instantly and keeps circulating. The economic stimulus effect of directing targeted relief to low-income beneficiaries is arguably more powerful per dollar than almost any other form of government spending, because the velocity of that money through the economy is so high. Lawmakers who understand basic economics know this, which makes the continued inaction even more difficult to explain. I want to hear from you on this because your voice in this conversation genuinely matters. Do you agree that lawmakers are making a mistake by letting this sit unaddressed? Do you think the 12-month extension and the income-based phase-out structure makes sense as modifications to the original proposal? Do you think funding this through general revenue or tariff proceeds rather than the trust fund removes the primary objection that has been blocking it? And do you believe, as I do, that the midterm elections later this year represent the real deadline here, the moment when the cost of continued inaction becomes most visible and most immediate for the lawmakers who have been sitting on their hands? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every comment that comes through, and I mean that. The voices in this community are some of the clearest and most grounded perspectives I encounter anywhere. And on a topic like this, where the stakes are genuinely high for millions of real people, I want to know exactly where you stand. Let me know what you think about the letter, whether you agree with the proposed modifications, and what you want to see happen next. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about this as much as I do, and I will see you in the next one.